So you never thought you would leave Nike. I get that. I think every MBA program has like Nike as a case study for something. Yep. And so it's just, I can imagine getting a gig with Nike and just being like, I did it.
Yes.
So why did you leave? What drove you? What were you hungry for?
Yeah, I would say, so I had a friend at Boston Scientific. She's still there. I consider her just a beacon for my career. And she had reached out and she's like, we're trying to do this e-commerce thing and kind of need help. And so ultimately the reason I jumped industries, I never saw myself in healthcare. I didn't know anything about it. I thought, I'm in consumer. How is that even relatable? And we would always say things curing cancer or don't get too wrapped up in things because you're not having, ultimately the message is impacting that much. But I looked at the industry and I said, well, sadly, healthcare is growing as an industry. The company's doing amazing things. They are, I think at the time, kind of $11-12 billion and have no online sales. And so I thought, well, what an opportunity to kind of bring, in my naive mind at the time, kind of an Amazon-like experience. I know that term gets tossed around all the time, but maybe a Nike-like experience, if you will, to a company that has no online sales. And so I just thought to myself, this is an incredible opportunity to come in, start a team, build from the ground up. Like a greenfield implementation in 2019 is pretty incredible. And then COVID hit, and so we didn't actually end up launching until about late 2021. But it's just been, I'm not exaggerating, it's been the most rewarding almost 6 years of my life. Just coming in and learning how in a really large company to build business cases that others can relate to and then share that ROI success.
Hey everyone, I am so excited to be interviewing Deirdre Peters, who's the Director of Digital Experience at Boston Scientific. We have a really special episode today because we're filming in Chicago, just around the B2B Online conference. Deirdre, can you please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us what your title means? What does your role entail?
Yeah. So thank you for having me on. It's a great honor of mine to be here today, live in Chicago, where we're both attending this wonderful conference around B2B e-commerce. So I am, like you said, Director of Digital Experience at Boston Scientific. It's kind of the culmination of a vision for having a role that is both customer experience and our kind of rep experience. So we have a lot of sales reps who do incredible work, very clinically trained, who need a good experience digitally as well. And so it's kind of a role that culminates in a good experience around digital tools for both our customers and our reps.
Okay, so I know that you have 2 young boys. How do you describe your job to your boys?
Yes. So it's a funny story. So now I tell them that I do digital or e-commerce and they actually kind of get it. And they're 6 and 9 now. But probably about 6 years ago, I had at my son's school, they asked him, what does your dad do? And what does your mom do? And at the time I worked at Nike. And so he said, well, my mom sends emails for Nike. And so I said, okay, that's not quite what I do. I mean, it kind of is, but it's not quite. And so then I told him I do e-commerce and it's like Amazon, but not at Amazon. Mm-hmm. And so to this day, he says, my mom does e-commerce, but not Amazon.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that. And can you describe what Boston Scientific does as a company?
Yeah. So we are a nearly $17 billion medical device manufacturer. So we make products in the cardiology space and the kind of endoscopy space. So we make these devices that are meant to improve the lives of patients around the world. And it's just a great industry to be in. Just feel like you're really impacting patients. We have 44 million patients we impact globally yearly. So the way I think of it is even just in the minute or two that we've been talking here, we've impacted another 250 patients.
That's so incredible. So we're here because of B2B Online, which is a really big conference in e-commerce digital experience, specifically with B2B companies. So can you describe Boston Scientific in terms of B2B? Like describe the B2B aspect of Boston Scientific?
Yeah, it's a great question because I actually made an industry industry jump and had to learn, what does B2B even mean?
Right. And that if you could define that.
Yeah. Well, there's B2C, there's B2B, there's
Right.
B2B2C. And so it's easy to get confused, right?
Mhm.
So having grown up in the B2C world, which is direct to customer, the likes of Converse and Nike.com, switching to B2B, which is business to business, or what does that really mean? So we sell to hospitals and surgical clinics our products. And so we are very much a business to business, and they use the products to service their end patients. So that's B2B. Very much fell into it. I had never intended to leave B2C, but I will say that I truly love the B2B world. I think there's just so much opportunity. It's so fun to solve the challenges that come along that are fairly unique to B2B.
I agree with you. I think there is so much opportunity in B2B. And I think there's a lot of talk and content around how B2B is ripe for disruption.
Yeah.
At least in what I do on the e-commerce digital agency side, we look at B2B and we see so many companies where their tech stack is really antiquated, the websites don't work, or maybe they're not even transacting online. Maybe their website is just like a catalog of information on the products, and then they still rely on old school like sales people. And in that way, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Can you talk about what you see in terms of impact in B2B? And you've had a huge impact on Boston Scientific and really modernizing the way that Boston Scientific comes to market and interacts with consumers. Can you talk a little bit about basically the change that you have helped make happen at Boston Scientific?
Yeah, definitely. It's been challenging, but probably the most rewarding journey of my career at Boston Scientific. So very much like you described in manufacturing in general, we are incredibly technologically advanced in medical device research and production, always innovating, always producing world-class products. But the digital transformation journey is somewhat newer. So kind of started 5 to 10 years ago with really driving the customer experience. So one of the reasons that Boston Scientific got into e-commerce was because we were hearing from sales reps and customers alike that we love your devices. In the case of our customers, they said, we love your reps, but you're hard to do business with. And so we began a mission to change that, to make it easier to do business, to understand what it meant to be easier to do business with us. That again, we have like these highly clinically trained sales reps who are advising physicians in cases on product usage, and they don't need to be burdened with admin work of getting products delivered or tracking products or seeing if something's in stock. So if we can really take that burden off of them, they can impact more patients and just drive their business a little bit more.
And I think that digitally transforming an organization, especially one as big and well known as Boston Scientific, I think that is a really impressive feat. But to add to that, there are quite a few restrictions and things to keep in mind around a company operating in the medical space.
Yeah.
So we talk about change management. That's like a big hot topic, especially at B2B Online. There's a lot of people that give talks and there's panels around how to push digital transformation in organizations where there's a lot of friction around it. Maybe it's culture at the organization, like, well, we've always done things that way, or to make this change would be so disruptive and expensive, and we'd have to change the way we do things. How you said the digital transformation journey at Boston Scientific has been started 10 years ago. Can you kind of talk about what it was like when you first joined the organization, what the culture was like, the appetite for change was, and what was your remit in joining?
So I actually started out as the first person to start this e-commerce team. I was a product owner at the time, and I will say that one thing that was possibly, maybe not unique, but I felt very lucky to have, is Boston Scientific may have people who have been there a while, but very, very incredibly welcoming to outside thought and how to transform digitally. So I never felt resistance. I think people within the company embraced change, which is something that is still true today, 6 years later. And I think in joining, I remember thinking this is a really cool opportunity. I'm not sure they know what they've given me, because working on Converse.com or on Nike.com, you work with so many different teams and hundreds, if not 1,000 people working on e-commerce. And to go in and be the only person was definitely a challenge and eye-opening. But if you go back to the change management aspect of things, while we do put a heavy emphasis on change management, I don't typically refer to it as change management. I actually think of it more as commercial excellence and how you bring a product, any product, to market, whether your consumer is our sales rep or a customer, really matters. And so if you train people well and you share what's in it for them, I think that driving, intrinsic value for people is what gets you over the finish line. So we've been very successful with adoption, and part of it, I think, is our model where we build what's in it for you as a sales rep, and why should you bring this to your customer, and how is that going to benefit you and the organization. So we've been very successful there, very proud of the adoption we've driven, but change management is so key, and that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges along the way. Just because there is an active resistance doesn't mean there isn't a little resistance. So I think for me, it's really breaking it down into ultimately who's your audience and how you make this valuable for them.
And I think that part of why you're so successful is that I think you're very focused on people and communicating to people, and that can be seen as a soft skill. You also, by the way, math major from MIT, by the way, so she's definitely got in her resume, like, this is a quantitative chick for sure. But also, it was just really interesting to me because I'm like, you've accomplished something really incredible at Boston Scientific, and she recently got a promotion, by the way. So I think like a big part of that is that soft skill of working with the sales team. And that's something that is brought up a lot, is distrust among sales teams and marketing teams. Who gets attribution on a sale? Yeah. So I think having that communication aspect and building a relationship with those stakeholders is so critical. And I'm like, does that resonate?
It absolutely does. I mean, what comes to mind, even with the conversation we were just having around value and what's in it for them and understanding your audience, comes empathy, right? Putting yourself in someone's shoes and trying to understand where they're coming from and what their pain points might be and how you can help solve those, I think is just key. And so as I look at relationships, to me, relationships are everything.
It so
and
is.
I love people, so it makes it easier, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to be intentional about it. So I build relationships before work. So that means if I'm meeting you for the first time, I probably will surprise you. We may not even get to work, but I will know all kinds of things about you and what makes you happy and motivated. And then maybe we'll get into the challenges of work and the problems you're trying to solve. But I just believe in a people first, you are a human being first mentality. And someone said something to me once that was really impactful. We have territories that roll up to regions that roll up to vast areas of land, like across the United States or in EMEA or other regions. And somebody said something once that was impactful in the sense that they said, behind when you drill down into a region and a territory, it might be called like Knoxville West or something, just as an example. Behind every territory is a human being who's trying to make the best living for their family, trying to impact the patients. And so we're a very large company, but I think it's very important to never lose sight that there are human beings driving all of this. And so relationships to me truly are everything. I just value connection with people before diving into work.
And I think related to that is, I'm sure throughout your career, you've cultivated your skills around communication. And that's a big part of building relationships. But communicating is so critical in so many ways. Also, being able to communicate to your team, your managers, the impact of what you do. I'm sure being able to tell stories with analytics, that's part of communication. Does that resonate as far as growing in your career?
Yes, absolutely. I think, and you referenced, a very quantitative background. And I would say that while it's been super quantitative, I've always looked for what's the insight? What am I going to learn? And how is this going to help me or someone else tell a story? So storytelling to me is also just key in everything we do. It goes back to the why. I mean, I always come back to the why. But if you can share that vision with your teams and you can bring people along for the ride, you never have to be this delegator, right? You don't have to have work and be telling teams what to do. People share the vision and the work organically happens. And so I think that's what I love doing, is sharing that passion through relationship building, sharing my vision and hearing other people's visions and seeing where they intersect and how we can drive forward together. I love that part of my job job, my company, my personal life, everything.
And there's very practical reasons. If someone deeply understands the shared vision, that means you have to give less instruction.
Yeah.
People know what to do in a situation if they know the why behind it. So I think that's a really powerful thing to talk about. So you dressed a little bit of some companies maybe you guys haven't heard of, Converse and Nike. So you've had quite a career and you came from D2C, direct to consumer. I want to talk about, actually, I want to pull it way back. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful town, kind of known for revolutionary history, right? So grew up very well versed in that. Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, Lexington, Concord, etc. My parents are both physicists, so the academic focus comes from somewhere. But yeah, I grew up with brothers and just had a great childhood of sports alongside academics, of course. It was always a focus. But yeah, so Lexington, Massachusetts. I guess, it's interesting today is you grow up and you spend so much time thinking like, where am I going to go in the world? And then you land kind of right back where you're from, right? So I don't live in Lexington today, but not too far away. But yeah, I have very fond memories of the town growing up.
Oh, cool. So your parents, both physicists, you were number 4 of 5, right? And 4 boys and one. Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about you applying to college. Give me some sense of your educational background, like the beginning and what drove your choices really early on. Yeah.
Well, it's become lesser known as I've gotten a little older, but I actually went to college to play golf. It was my dream to go pro in golf. So I went down to school in Texas first and played 2 years there. And then realized, I didn't quite have the performance under pressure or just that talent edge to be that good on tour. And so came back up to Boston to finish up my degree in math and then also business school. So that was a big piece of shaping who I am today. I owe a lot of my journey today to those 2 years in business school. Really just changed everything for me.
So you went into an MBA program right after undergrad.
Yeah.
And I know that we had met and hung out a little bit before this, and you had said to me, if I could do it differently, maybe I would have had a little bit of experience in the workforce, maybe taken a little bit of a gap working before going into MBA. Can you talk a little bit about what it was for you being a student for so long, like undergrad and then going straight into MBA? And I know people were a little bit older than you, but it was impacted you in your career by a lot. So can you take us back to that time?
Yeah. So first thing I'll say is that being at MIT Sloan was the most intellectually stimulating, amazing time of my career. And like you said, it was just getting started. And so when I went into business school, I kind of had this mentality, and maybe I still do to some extent, but just checking things off. It's become cool people do this, so I'm going to do that. And so it was more like, well, if MBAs are valued, then I'm going to go get an MBA. And what ended up happening was kind of a revolution in my mind of opening my eyes to the world in so many ways. So when I was at MIT, I learned about careers I never knew existed. I learned about people and backgrounds and countries they were from that somewhat never knew existed. And it really opened my eyes. Where I say I would like to have gone in with a little more experience is just I feel like the coursework would have been a little more impactful. I'll give an example, like organizational behavior. I was kind of cruising on through and just like, oh, that's interesting. But now it's a passion of mine to understand when you make a change here, how does it impact individuals and people over here? And just how can you get optimal happiness in your workforce by the way you design your organization? So that's just one small example where I kind of look back and I say maybe a couple of years of experience would have been good. That being said, there's pros and cons. So you mentioned being in school for a really long time. It felt that way, but I never got out of studying. It just was a habit. And I think where some people may have gone out for 5 to 10 years of working before business school might have had a harder adjustment coming back and just having to get back into coursework and tests and all that fun stuff that goes with it. And I'm coming up on my 15-year reunion, which is just crazy to say for business school, but helping plan that. And I'll admit, for those out there, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, people who are coming up on their 15th reunion, like you're so old. And now here I am coming up for the 15th year reunion, and I don't feel old in any way. Life is a beautiful, long adventure. And I'd say to people who are thinking, at 24, 25, that 15 years is old, it's not. Life is really just getting
It happens
started.
like that. And you're like,
Yes,
what?
it
I'm
does happen
here.
like that. And
Yeah.
I still feel like, in a way, like I'm still picking what I want to do when I grow up.
Aw. So at what point, I want to know where the seeds of marketing came about, because you were a math major, you went straight into your MBA, at Sloan. What sparked your curiosity around marketing, around business? Because you could have gone anywhere with that, with math. And
Yeah. So coming out in '08
Yeah.
wasn't the best of times economically. So that had a little bit of impact on it. I was looking at jobs in financial services and not feeling super passionate about it. And so part of the reason I went from math degree to business school was I kind of wanted to round out my experience. So I said, I didn't know what I didn't know, in the sense that I didn't know so many careers existed outside of what I knew. But I do remember thinking, I don't know if I want to do math my whole life. I love it, yes, but I don't know if I don't know if I want to be in academics. I don't know if I want to be an actuary. I don't know, kind of all those very mathematically oriented career paths. And so when I got into business school at Sloan, I was exposed to things, consumer behavior and marketing. And I remember falling in love with it because you could still have that quantitative background to drive things, doing analyses on data, but you would use that to maybe market a product to someone and ultimately convince them to buy it because it was a need for them. So I just remember making that connection between, yes, math skills are important and it's something that I hope my kids grow up being good at, but it's not everything. There's ways to apply it that can be very rewarding.
So can you talk about your first job out of your MBA program? Yeah.
Yes.
Where was that?
Yeah, so I was at Staples and, again, first job out, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I went and it was a hard adjustment coming out of business school where you're kind of just 24/7. There's a lot going on. There's so many startup ideas floating around. And then to go into a well-established company is definitely an adjustment. I worked on our customer satisfaction program as a retail analyst. So that meant when you get those receipts and they have a little survey at the bottom, I was the one analyzing those results. And so we relied on those quite a bit for direction of programs and product mixes. And so I went into kind of the merchandising side for a little bit, category management, portfolio, and did that for a while. And then, my career took a turn with my next job, which was at Vistaprint. And I'll never forget the Staples days because I learned so much. It grew so much as a person. I was only there a few years, but it made a big impact on me just seeing how a really large company operates.
And structure at a large company and how decisions are made and who the stakeholders are, who needs to say yes to it.
Yeah.
So much can be gleaned from working at a large company for sure.
Yeah, totally agree.
Can you talk about Vistaprint?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Vistaprint, the reason I'm smiling is because I very much fell into it. So I think a recruiter reached out one day and they said they had a role and it seemed to pretty well align with what I did at Staples. And so I was kind of ready to take that. And then they said, well, we're actually pivoting a little bit. We actually think you'd be a fit for this other role we have as a digital product manager. And I'm not going to lie, I didn't really know what digital was. I didn't really know and understand what a product manager does. I mean, I knew you kind of maybe built some products, but I didn't really know how, and certainly not in a digital space. So I took the role, and I remember on the very first day on the job, my boss sat down with me and he was like, you're going to need to manage all your stuff in Jira. And if you're a product manager, there are many people who probably haven't heard of Jira, but if you're a product manager, especially a digital one, you use Jira. It's a ticketing system that sees development work through. And the fact that I didn't know that probably scared him just a little bit.
Like his face was like,
yes, I
what?
remember that look of when I said, what's Jira? And he was probably thinking, wow, we're really starting at the beginning here. But it was a very rewarding experience in the sense that we built a product line out. We acquired a company. So I got to see my first acquisition around integrating products from a different company, integrating customer bases. And then we launched a line of products called Do It For You. So we were very much a do-it-yourself company. And to this extent, to some extent, they still are today, but it was a very successful line of products. I was able to work in India for a while, just kind of
And you're
exposing it to the
25 years old
world.
at the time, right?
Yes,
So that's pretty
correct.
exciting to be
Yeah,
sent to India and like
yes.
oversee the formation of teams or the
Yeah,
merging
we
of
were we
teams.
were
And
actually using a third party kind of for digital website
Mhm.
development, and so we flew to India to bring it all to life and get to know the people that would run those teams. And I do tell this story somewhat fondly, somewhat embarrassingly as well. I actually ate a napkin while I was in
Oh,
India. So just to go back to kind of how important culture is, I was at a dinner table with some of our new colleagues, and now I've seen these napkins where you pour water on them and they kind of
oh no.
expand.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a Indian dessert. So I was like, well, I'm going to dive right in here and I'm going to try this new
Good
dessert.
for
And
you.
so I've
But
I've always liked trying new food. And so I ate the napkin and I didn't swallow it, luckily.
did
But
anyone see you
oh,
or
yes, everyone saw. And I think everyone was like, no, wait, don't do
what?
that. And then I was super embarrassed. But the reason I tell the story now is that, first of all, we all make
Yeah.
mistakes and we all make assumptions. And just getting to know different cultures is so important for rounding yourself out as a human and understanding where people might be coming from and kind of going back to that empathy we talked about.
Yeah. So Vistaprint. So were you building this segment from scratch, this do it for
Yeah.
you service component? And very successfully, you accomplished this. And this is still a segment that exists today. Would you say that was this turning point in your career? Was this like something that feels like it maybe put you on the map a little bit or yeah?
It was a turning point for that, but actually it was more of a turning point for, I'd say, confidence. So the biggest lesson I learned from that is that you can dive in and do anything you put your mind to, as long as you're willing to ask questions, not worry about this is a stupid question, but, and just
What's
learning
Jira?
not to say that.
What's
Yes.
Jira?
Like, and maybe there are stupid questions, but you can't go in thinking that, right? You have to just embrace, what do I need to do to get this job done? And you problem solve. And ultimately, at the end of the day, none of us are born with experience. We gain it through our experiences at different roles, at different companies. And I think the biggest thing I wish I had known was that everything's just an exercise in problem solving. And you will figure it out. You ask the right questions and good things happen, But yes, it's something I'm super proud of, a product that still exists today. And it wasn't easy to figure out. It was a change of business model, but we recognized a need with our consumer base and kind of just went after that.
Did you run into any friction or difficulty around your age? Because you're quite young, I feel like.
I think it was hard. Coming out of business school was hard because first I felt like everyone's little sister. That was during school. And then it was hard coming out because I didn't have experience. So I had this brand new, fancy, shiny MBA, but no work experience. And so that's why I'll always be grateful to Staples, who took a swing and a bet on me. But yeah, it's a good learning lesson. And I feel like I've tried to carry that with me today. And maybe it's partially because I still feel very young, approaching 40, but still feel very young. But I think that as you get more experienced, you look back and you realize, wow, I did accomplish quite a bit, but it hasn't always been that way for me. I definitely suffered from imposter syndrome for many years during my early years of my career and always found a way to attribute success to someone else or to some other team and find a reason why it wasn't me that really drove that success.
And you were telling me that this is something that you feel that you're just overcoming now.
Yeah.
That blew my mind when she said that, because when I see Deirdre and I look at your list of accomplishments, I'm like, this chick she did everything and she's so successful. She's like the top of what she does. And to hear that you feel, what does imposter syndrome feel in your body?
I think imposter syndrome is a lot of fear. So I think it's that, do I speak up or am I exposing myself as like not that accomplished after all? Or maybe if I say something stupid, then they're going to think, oh my gosh, how did this person come from, an MIT or whatever? Yeah, it's something I am just overcoming now at this point in my career, just realizing that feeling of this fear of exposing that you don't really have the background or the accomplishments or someone else was responsible for them isn't real, but it's a very real feeling. And so, yeah, I'd say it's fear.
And I thought it struck me when you said earlier that it kind of feels like you're over caffeinated. And when you said that, I know that feeling.
Yeah, it's
like
the feeling of being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
If
overstimulated.
Many of us who have had too much caffeine you get that. It's almost like heart palpitations, but
You're
it's
not
just this
grounded.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're not grounded physically. It's almost like paralysis. I don't know what to do first. And I think that can happen when you take over a new role, but especially so when you have imposter syndrome, because you're kind of like, oh my God, this is the time it's going to come to light that I don't really know what I'm talking about. And it's not a great place to be, but I share it because it's so important for people who maybe at earlier points in their careers to realize, fight through it. Don't let that define you. Own your accomplishments, be proud of your accomplishments, and just use that to drive your future success rather than trying to always find a way to bring yourself down.
I think I really wanted to ask you that question of like, how does that feel in your body? Because when you say that you feel imposter syndrome, I'm like, what does that even mean to her? And then when you said we described it physically, I was like, wait, I know that physical sensation.
Yeah.
And so then
Yeah.
that really clicked in my mind. I'm like, oh, wow, she does feel imposter syndrome. And I felt that before. And it's something that you have to continually work on. And what are some ways that you deal with feelings of imposter syndrome or overwhelm?
I'll start first with saying that I will never be the person who's complacent because I always crave that challenge of a new opportunity. And so I always continually take scary leaps in my life, whether it's career, whether it's trying something new in my personal life, or even the first day on a golf course when you haven't played for a while, that can be pretty intimidating. But when you think of overcoming that, it's really self-care. That's what I've found is extremely important. And so it's this idea of treating yourself well, and the whole thing we were talking about earlier around put your mask on before others, right? And so self-care is so important to me, whether that, self-care can mean different things to different people, but whether that's going for a run or going to the gym or eating better, eating like nourishing food, or just going out with friends for a good time, you have to focus on that. You have to make time for that in your life. And self-care is what leads to more positive self-talk.
Mhm.
And self-talk is probably everything. I mean, we
Mhm.
are our own worst critics. So yeah, I think overcoming it really comes down to how do you overcome that feeling of being overwhelmed? You take a step back, you break things down into small pieces, and you focus on making yourself a happy version of yourself, and then you can take on anything.
I want to talk about your next step after Vistaprint. So Vistaprint, the takeaway or one of the takeaways is you came away with it with this sense of self-confidence. That's so exciting.
Yes.
So what happened after Vistaprint?
Yeah. So I actually went to a company called CJ Affiliate, which is kind of where I learned the back end of the internet, is what I say. So it was everything about tracking, cookies, engagement, building customer profiles, and being able to kind of target marketing based on profiles, and learned a lot about data and privacy and how to and not target consumers. And so that really gave me the grounding. I don't think I would have been as effective at my future roles, but that was where I actually started speaking at industry events for the first time. And
How old were you at this point?
Good question. I was starting to lose track.
Like 25 was Vistaprint and
like early 30s,
Okay.
like low to early, what am I saying? Early 30s. But yeah, so really I spent about 4 years there, again, back into the internet, just how it all works. And you see ads that are like, wow, I was just looking at that, or it feels like you just think about it now and it shows up, but really trying to understand all of that. I would have
the
never been
mechanisms
able
that
to
result. in
Yeah,
those.
yeah, exactly. And I would have never been able to take on the next challenge, which was at Nike, if I hadn't done that.
So everybody's heard of Nike. How did you go from CJ Affiliate to Nike?
Yeah, so recruiter reached out. They were working on building out a small team to separate Converse.com from Nike.com. So they were one shared experience and really two different consumer groups. I mean, Nike has a lot of different customer profiles, like, you could argue probably hundreds. But ultimately, if you looked at the kind of the brand consumer for both, they were very different. And Converse is a lot smaller than Nike, so it was kind of absorbed into the Nike experience. And we knew, and they knew, that there was really a missing element of being able to offer an experience to the Converse customer. And so I was recruited to be on a small team to take on the replatform, pulling Converse.com off of Nike.com. And it wasn't, not that just, replatform's a big deal.
Yeah.
But this was redoing supply chain. This was learning by fire hose, supply chain, distribution centers, just how it all works and setting all that up, taking out marketing technology at the same time, whether it was our CRM system, I actually had a small B2B presence there, but just how do you build something that is going to delight a consumer and then bring it to life with technology? So just it was in a very immersive experience. We worked a lot, but again, incredibly rewarding. And to see sales soar digitally after that
That's
was
so
just,
gratifying.
it was incredible. And honestly, I never would have been able to I keep saying this, it's kind of like that my career is built upon itself, but I never would have been able to do the job at Boston Scientific had it not been for learning the back end of the internet, learning the digital space at Vistaprint, and pulling it all together at Converse.
So, and you hadn't worked in like apparel fashion before.
No, I did a small internship actually with Converse back in business school.
Oh, cool.
That was my summer internship, but no, not really. And the focus of that was entirely different. So it was eye-opening.
What's the big takeaway from the Converse experience? And how long were you at Nike?
Just a couple years, and
Okay.
that's a whole other story because I never saw myself leaving.
Yeah.
But here we are, right? Yeah, so we did that, and sorry, I forgot the question.
Oh, sorry. What was your takeaway from that experience?
Yeah, so my takeaway from working at Converse and Nike was the biggest thing I would say is that giant problems just need to be broken down into manageable work streams. And the people I met on that job, I'm in touch with today. We bonded over this shared goal and vision. And I think that's probably, if I had two takeaways, the second one would be around always have a clear vision, always capitalize on being able to communicate with people and share that vision and make sure people are bought in, because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If people see the vision, you do a whole lot less having to kind of bring people along, just pieces fall into place.
I feel like I'm seeing this thread with you where something that you're phenomenal at is like taking this big initiative, and this is going to lead into Boston Scientific, so I'll try to rein it in. But you take this like huge initiative that would cause people to be really intimidated. When you tell me when you're joining these organizations and what you're setting out to do, I'm just like, oh my God, that's overwhelming.
There's a lot of white space in what I've done.
Yeah. But your ability to be like, all right, let's problem solve. And then at the same time, let me build relationship and communicate the shared vision, because that's how we problem solve. Because I think part of this too is like a lot of people feel intimidated by a big goal. I feel that. And I
do too.
I get overwhelmed. I freeze. And it's just how much that helps when you have someone be like, yeah, it is big. This is really big.
Yes.
Scary. Here, this is where we can break it into bite-sized pieces. This is the vision. And then it's comforting to hear that, to be on a team with a leader who does that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, because I was very lucky to have managers in the past who were able to help me break down a big problem into smaller problems to solve. And so I'm not going to lie. I mean, I get overwhelmed sometimes today too, because if something's not scary, I don't think it's worth taking on. I think you want to always be challenging yourself and never get complacent. But that also doesn't mean things have to be complicated. You can simplify everything. And so when you get to that point of feeling overwhelmed, I think it's important to just you might think you need to dive in. It's almost like you need to take a step back. And the work will always be there Monday or Friday or whatever day it is. Take a step back, focus on yourself, like we were talking about with self-care, and break the problem down, because that solves most everything. It doesn't mean you're not going to feel overwhelmed. And in some ways, I would argue you should sometimes feel that overwhelming feeling. But yeah, it's...
So you never thought you would leave Nike. I get that. I think every MBA program has like Nike as a case study for something. Yep. And so it's just, I can imagine getting a gig with Nike and just being like, I did it.
Yes.
So why did you leave? What drove you? What were you hungry for?
Yeah, I would say, so I had a friend at Boston Scientific. She's still there. I consider her just a beacon for my career. And she had reached out and she's like, we're trying to do this e-commerce thing and kind of need help. And so ultimately the reason I jumped industries, I never saw myself in healthcare. I didn't know anything about it. I thought, I'm in consumer. How is that even relatable? And we would always say things curing cancer or don't get too wrapped up in things, because you're not ultimately the message is impacting that much. But I looked at the industry and I said, well, sadly, healthcare is growing as an an industry. The company's doing amazing things. They are, I think at the time, kind of $11-12 billion and have no online sales. And so I thought, well, what an opportunity to kind of bring, in my naive mind at the time, kind of an Amazon-like experience. I know that term gets tossed around all the time, but maybe a Nike-like experience, if you will, to a company that has no online sales. And so I just thought to myself, this is an incredible opportunity to come in, start a team, build from the ground up. Like a greenfield implementation in 2019 is pretty incredible. And then COVID hit, and so we didn't actually end up launching until about late 2021. But it's just been, I'm not exaggerating, it's been the most rewarding almost 6 years of my life, just coming in and learning how in a really large company to build business cases that others can relate to and then share that ROI success.
Can you talk about your early days at Boston Scientific? You're coming into this organization. You've got some aspects that I would think give you some cachet, like built in MIT, Nike, success at Vistaprint, building this big part of the business. Did you feel anything in the way of pressure? I'm just curious to see, like, coming in, and you had pretty big remit goal. Just curious how you felt at that time.
Pressure is a good word because you get so built up as kind of the e-commerce person, and I'm thinking, well, if you want to go back to the imposter syndrome, you're like, well, I've done a few things, but I don't know if I'm like qualified for this. And so there is a little bit of that fear. But again, I believe in taking those leaps in life, and whether that in personal or work, just doing something that scares you. And yes, it was a big remit, but I would say that my naivety actually helped a little bit, because I came in and I was just going to treat it like a B2C experience and just plop an experience in front of our customers. And I would say that's 90% paid off, but I've also learned B2B can be unique. And there are some unique challenges that have to be solved in a different way than just bringing the consumer lens to things. So that's,
Can you talk about the unique things about B2B?
Yeah.
Because we're at B2B Online, and digital transformation is, you're going to hear it in the hallways all over the Marriott downtown. Digital transformation and the blue sky of B2B, and like, why can't Amazon experiences left and right with heavy industry? And it's like, there are also reasons why you don't see that right now. And it goes to some of these unique challenges in B2B. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Some of them, probably if I had to say like the top 2 or 3, it would be personalization. And I'll tell you what that means, because that can mean a lot of things in a second. And kind of the fact that you have a repeat customer. Now, obviously in B2C, you can have customers who come back and purchase. But in B2B, you have a customer who's very used to purchasing from you all the time. So even I'll give you an example, like order history. On Amazon, your order history, you might be lengthy because you've been an Amazon customer for 10, probably 15 years at this point. But in B2B, we have customers that can place 25, 30 orders a day. And so order history becomes very lengthy. And the personalization aspect of that comes in is that a customer can't find their order in lengthy order history. So really getting to the root of what are they trying to find when they go into their order history, and being able to personalize the experience so that it's impactful for them, whether it's back order management, because sadly we sometimes have back orders, and what orders do I have open? And those are just not things you think about in the B2C world as a customer. And so in some ways, I'm very glad I came in naive, because I was able to walk past some of what might have tripped me up on B2B. And we launched an incredible, I'll say, Nike-like experience. But now I've come to realize kind of the finer points, around quoting, personalization, and just account management make it very unique. And you also can't get it wrong. So you can't, like, if I suggest a plaid shirt that goes with a striped pair of pants, most people are going to look at that and be like, I don't know if that's really for me. But in B2B, if you suggest the wrong product for a piece of equipment, or you suggest a product for a case that it's not actually applicable for, there's real life ramifications for that.
Huge disruption.
Not just an unhappy customer, but potentially other issues from that. So you just have to be very much more careful thoughtful and calculated in the experience that you deliver.
So, my interview with you today is going to be the first interview of a whole series I'm doing with women in B2B. And I am really excited about this series because I think that women are underrepresented on leadership teams in general, but particularly, at least in my lived experience, going to B2B events, trade shows like Pack Expo, there are very few women.
Yeah.
Even it's a stark, dramatic underrepresentation.
Yes.
And so when I find women leaders that are down to be on camera, because that's not to, which is like, I get that it's fair. But when I see a woman leader like yourself that has accomplished so much, I really wanted to show younger folks, also people pivoting in their careers, show specifically within B2B, someone that's making a big impact and successful. And can you talk a little bit about B2B as a landscape in the, I guess, industry landscape and your experience being a woman in B2B?
Yeah, it's definitely, that is a passion of mine, is to increase the number of women in our space, in our industry. So I think that the best teams are balanced teams. Women bring a lot to the conversation, and men do too. I'm not saying they don't, but it's like women bring a lot to the conversation. And when you're underrepresented, you just aren't bringing as much of that to the conversation. So it's a big passion of mine to increase, which kind of goes back, drawing parallels in my earlier life around golf, also a very male dominated sport. And it's changing over time, which is really awesome to see. But it's kind of a theme throughout my life, is how can we build each other up as women? How can we support each other, get into industries that are somewhat male dominated still? And so in B2B in particular, I think that I don't know what the reason is that why, maybe because manufacturing has typically been more male. I don't know what the reason is, but I'm determined to change that.
Multiple reasons,
yes.
Probably.
Alongside you, I'm determined to change that.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing I would say to women looking to potentially make that jump into B2B, there's a lot of quick wins that you can have and get your feet wet in an environment that's very open to needing disruption. And so that can be really fun. And the biggest thing is finding female allies that you can learn from, and kind of, part of the biggest thing I love about these events that we're at right now is that they bring together people in the same position as you. They might be a leader at a company trying to figure out digital transformation, trying to figure out e-commerce in the B2B space, and connecting with other women who are there to learn from each other, to overcome that kind of lack of diversity in our field.
And I think part of my motivation in doing the series too is, and this came up in conversation with another woman I was talking to earlier at the conference, we've got Emily in Paris, which is giving a lot of younger girls, younger folks, some representation of somebody in marketing and how glamorous it can be. But as someone who has been in D2C ecom, working with apparel and fashion and cosmetics, that industry is pretty competitive. A lot of people are going after those positions, and people aren't going after the B2B positions the same way. Yeah. So it's kind of, there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah. And oftentimes the pay for those positions is way higher sometimes than if you were to take a similar position, makeup brand. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're getting a lot of exposure. You're responsible for more. There can be so much professional development, personal development too, in working in B2B companies. So thank you so much for being
on this. I think it can be intimidating too.
Yes.
It's kind of like walking into a new gym for the first time.
Yeah.
You don't know anybody. You feel like everyone's looking at you and to some extent judging you. And ultimately, it's a very welcoming environment. That's what I've found. But you don't know that, right? And so getting into it can be hard. I agree that the opportunity is just, it's incredible. The ability to influence these massive digital transformations at manufacturers that have been around for a very long time is an incredible opportunity. I would encourage anyone that's thinking about taking that leap to do it. And just especially if you're female, just bringing your life experience in and being a seat at the table and bringing that diverse thought is so important.
So important. And I think will be really key to seeing this industry modernize and improve. B2B is also a really big word because
Yeah.
there's so many, like if you walk
Means a
around,
lot.
it means
Yeah.
a lot because business to business, there's so many different types of businesses. You're in a healthcare company, but then we've got people at the conference that are selling electrical component parts and plastic. So it can mean so many different things, but I think it's really important for younger folks, for people who are exploring marketing, maybe who are in school, to go and expose yourself to all the industries and positions out there, not just the ones that perhaps are the most visible in social media.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I feel like there should be an Emily in Ohio. It's like, I feel like I would watch that. Like,
Yes.
because I say that because the Midwest is such a hub for heavy industry and manufacturing.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point because so often I think we chase the glamorous brand titles, right? It's
perceived
like,
glamour too, by the way.
perceived glamour,
There's a lot of
exactly.
perceived.
But to go back to your point, many people do that, and it's very competitive and can be very volatile.
Yes.
And I feel like actually manufacturing and B2B in particular can be so much more, I almost think of it as a very comforting environment. You have the time and the place to solve these challenges, and you're doing things that just bring a much higher impact because maybe they're a little more transformational than optimization efforts at these big brands.
So you have achieved so much at Boston Scientific. Can you let's talk a little bit about your promotion, your recent promotion. So what change happened? How did you approach getting promoted? I know that you set out to get this promotion, this position. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So thank you, first of all. I think for me, this was really a vision coming to life. So I look at our sales reps as customers just as much as I do our end customers. And so ultimately it goes back to, each person's a human being just trying to run their business. And so the type of commercial excellence that we've brought to our e-commerce program at Boston Scientific, I wanted to bring to our rep experience as well. And so I kind of floated this idea probably almost a year ago now. And again, I have the most incredible supportive leadership that I've ever seen in any company, and an appetite for change and an appetite to try things and improve always. We never stop trying to improve at Boston Scientific, and that's just been a really fun culture to be a part of. So the actual promotion came about just recently, actually, within the last couple of months. And so I now I still run our e-commerce program, which is obviously my little baby, but I also have kind of our, rep enablement, and think of tools like Salesforce.com and some of our other sales enablement tools as well. And so one of the things that it's funny because I just mentioned a bunch of platforms, but one of the things that I'm very passionate about is leading with use case and then finding technology to enable it.
Yeah.
So often I see
people shouldn't do it any other way.
Often though, you see technology kind of looking for a use case. And so especially that's my thoughts on AI too, is like AI is here to change the world. There's no doubt about that. But I think practical use case leads to practical application of AI and ROI. And rather than kind of like, I've got some AI and I'm looking for somewhere to apply it. So those are kind of just philosophies I keep. But yeah, so I've been in the role almost 2 months now. Not going to lie, like I've gotten overwhelmed at times. And I think because my focus is so much on people, growing a team size to what I am today can be a lot because you want to give everyone individual attention. You want to focus on who they are before you dive into work. And sometimes that is impossible.
Especially like as your team size grows, and there was incremental growth in your team, right? In the past 6 years.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, now that we've covered some of your accomplishments, I want to talk about something that has been really challenging for you. And what was really striking for me in conversation with you, there's a couple things. One, that we could relate in this way about imposter syndrome and feelings of overwhelm. Uber successful people are not immune to those feelings, those sensations. And also that you've experienced something truly, truly difficult and that did impact your life, but you were able to overcome it and still manifest a beautiful life and career in spite of going through something. And maybe not in spite of it. Maybe it's part of who you are and why. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in the 2010 to 2000, whatever, like 12, I ran a lot of marathons. It was kind of think of it as my therapy at the time. It was like I loved getting out in the sunshine and running and just feeling at peace with myself. But that did change back in 2013 when I was running the Boston Marathon. I was finishing up on Boylston Street when the first bomb went off, and I didn't know it was a bomb at the time. I actually looked at the finish. It was very smoky, but I looked and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to go for it. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it's a gas explosion. There could be people hurt. I should probably not try to run into it. And so I kind of turned to my left. There was a Starbucks in front of me, and that's when the second bomb went off. And so I saw a lot of things that I hope to never see again. I hope a lot of people in this life never experience that. And so trying to move on from that, I couldn't run. I would get such panic attacks. It just reminded me of being there for a good year. I really struggled with depression, anxiety, reliving it. I would force myself to go to work because it felt normal. I'd be on all day, but I would come home and sit in the car outside my apartment and just realize that 5 hours had gone by and I was still sitting in the car and just trying to process what had happened, why it happened, not necessarily like, why did this happen to me? But sometimes it was, why did this happen to me? And why did it hurt so many people so much? And I was spared, at least physically. And so I actually got into therapy then. And it was actually at the suggestion of my doctor, because I'd kind of gone and said, like, I'm really down. I don't know how to overcome this. And, she said, I can prescribe you things that will help. But she's like, you need to talk to somebody. And so I remember thinking to myself, what good is therapy going to do? You can't change what happened. You can't tell me it's not going to happen again. So what's the point? But I dragged myself there anyway, and it's been life-changing. I still go to therapy today. It's something I'm proud of. I hope others can share that they are as well. And it helped me process not just what happened, but unpack things that you don't realize you're carrying around with you in life. And it's just been a powerful self-care tool that's helped me navigate the challenges, imposter syndrome, and other kind of less kind of sad events in my life. But yeah, it changed who I was as a person. And I think for me, the biggest thing is I can't change what I saw, but I can change how I react to it. And I can control what happened, but I can control how I react to it. And I have 2 boys that are 6 and 9 now. And I ran the Boston Marathon on the 10th anniversary of the event so that I could show them that mom can do hard things. Like I can overcome that fear of the finish line. Take back the finish line was my motto. And I was able to do that. And it was just that, was my slowest marathon ever, but the most proud I've ever been of finishing a marathon and just overcoming everything I had seen that day and the resulting life implications of it.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. And thank you so much for sharing. I asked her permission before we covered that because I know this is one of the most impactful experiences of your life. And I think telling the story of how a very successful person went through something so profound, negatively profound, and like you also felt things in your life were on hold. I can relate to that. I think a lot of people listening today can relate to that. And I think the important takeaway is, yes, it's a part of your story. Yes, there was a time where you felt like things were on hold, but you still can have a beautiful life and a really great career.
Yes.
You can still have that. And like, I think people are a lot more understanding than you think they are. I'm sure there were people in your life that knew what you went through and it's just like, oh gosh, how profound. And there's also the impact of you feel so much empathy with people and you are probably a better leader because of it, because you understand people on this deep level.
Everyone's going through something. So you may not hear about it, you may not see it, they may not share it with you, and they don't need to if they don't want to, but everyone's usually going through something. And I happen to be an open book. I will discuss a lot with people because I've found that it helps me relate to others. And sometimes when I open up, they open up. So you just build a deeper connection. But yeah, I think something you said really hit me, which is you can have a great career even when something happens that obviously didn't choose for that to happen, questioned why it happened, had a year or even 2 years, arguably, of just not being in a good place. And I wouldn't say it's negatively affected my career. I would say that it's given me the perspective to appreciate what I have and love the life I live. And like you said, life is a beautiful thing. And I think I wish if there was one thing I could wish for, it'd be that I could take 23 to 25-year-old me and make myself realize, first of all, you're young. 23 to 25 is not old because you feel that way when you're there. And it's easy to say, oh my gosh, like I should have accomplished more, but you're just at the beginning and life is gorgeous. It's so fun. And it's all about just focusing on that human connection.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It really personally helped me. I have gone through things that made me feel like I had to put everything on hold for a bit. And I definitely had feelings of like, wow, I'm going backwards, or people are seeing me this way, that way. And you saying that, it helped me to see that this is something that it's part of the human condition, human experience, and that it isn't reflecting negatively on you. And if anything, there can be things in terms of learning about yourself, how your mind works, what you need to be okay and effective, just living life. Like I'm sure you learn so many self-care things from it. And you see people in this more forgiving manner. You're able to see, like, you don't know what people are going through, and you're a better leader because of it.
Yeah. And it goes back to the empathy, right? You don't know what someone's going through. Maybe they're having a bad day. You just kind of see a side of them, and maybe they're not even happy they shared that side of them, but we're all human. We're subject to emotion, how our day goes, the weather, events around us. And I just think it's so important to always be taking that empathetic view and saying they could be going through something. So just having that understanding. And I think motherhood changed me a lot too, in the sense that I look at my boys and I obviously want the best for them. And so I think I'm a little more forgiving because I'll say, like, that's someone's son, that's someone's father, that's someone's brother. And when you humanize everything, you just come from a much more understanding place.
And the way you communicate is better oftentimes.
Yeah. Well, and that goes when you communicate at work. A very real example is assuming positive intent. It's actually one of our core values at Boston Scientific, and
that's a good one.
People email is hard, text message can be hard to interpret, and what was intended may not be how it was perceived. And just always taking a lens of this person's we're all at the same company. We're trying to do the best job that we know how. And you said communication is super important, but how you communicate is also super important. And
it's everything.
It is everything.
It is actually everything.
Yes, it is everything. And everything from tone to the words you choose. So everything from tone to the words you choose to what method you choose to send that, whether it is email or text or a phone call or a Teams or whatever it is, just being very intentional about how you communicate. I agree with you. It's just so important.
So this has been such an amazing conversation. So many great takeaways from this conversation. I always like to end my interviews with, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self or younger folks that are listening in today that are navigating these early times in their career? What would you say to them?
I think the number one thing would be, don't be so hard on yourself. Focus on self-care. There was a time when feedback would burn so deeply, but I would think to myself, well, it's nothing that I haven't told myself, 10 times worse probably. And so don't be so hard on yourself. We all make mistakes in life, and it's how you learn from them and adapt and move on that changes who we are as people. So that would be my biggest takeaway. I think it's to go back to that self-care. It's super important to just always make sure that you are setting yourself up for success in life by taking care of yourself. And the last thing I'd say, just to go back to feedback for a second, someone once said to me, feedback's a gift. I'm sure many have said that and heard that. And I think that that's true. And I would say that the people who take the time to give you feedback care about you. And they wouldn't share if they didn't care. And so I think that's just something to know, is that people are trying to help you, trying to develop you, and it truly is a gift.
Because they are taking time and the energy to give you a response, as opposed they could just
they could just walk away. Yeah.
They could. Yeah. But that's also a good thing for me to hear too, because I also sometimes struggle with feedback.
Well, it's hard not to be sensitive to it and take it personally. But if you can see, again, assume positive intent, They are trying to help you in your career. They see something in you that they want to develop. And we all have things to work on. So I think once you can frame it that way, it's so much more rewarding to get feedback. And then feedback, we tend to focus on the negative side of it. Like, what am I doing wrong? But positive feedback can be so affirming too. And I think that another thing I try to do is just always be sharing at least 3 times as much positive observations as you do areas of improvement.
I'm going to take that. That's really good actionable advice right there,
Yeah.
and something I can easily implement. And I don't think about that, but just when I think of my own experience with managers, my favorite people I've worked under, they will sandwich
Yeah.
the constructive criticism, or not criticism, feedback,
Yeah.
with telling me what I'm doing right, or things how
Yep.
you're so.
Yep.
So, and maybe that's a response to how sensitive I am. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but I like it.
sensitive, you know,
Yeah,
it's a very
that's actually
real
human.
thing. Yes,
It's a human
yeah.
thing to feel things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's a
Yeah.
good thing.
well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I think this conversation, I'm so grateful for what you've shared with me today. And I think this conversation is going to be so valuable to so many people.
I hope
And
so. I
thank
hope it
you.
makes a big impact. Thank you for having me on. I've admired you from afar, and I
Oh,
just feel very honored
my
that
God.
I am
Oh my God, you
on
guys.
today.
That's crazy. Thank you for saying that. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.